For this exercise, we're going to be moving into two-point perspective. So as a refresher, this slide shows you the standard position that the viewer is in or the artist is in when they're drawing objects in one-point perspective. So if this is a top-down view of the scene, in one-point perspective, we're just seeing sort of the face of the boxes. We're not really seeing much about the sides of the boxes, and really the only part that is foreshortened are the planes that are moving directly away from us. So in one-point perspective, remember, this is how we were drawing things. We were using vertical lines, we were using horizontal lines, and we were using lines that converged to the central vanishing point. But now we're moving into two-point perspective. So from a top view, it means we've moved our own position, or we've turned the boxes so that now we're seeing all of the rectangular objects from a corner view. So we're going to be seeing more of both sides of them. And what happens is we lose one of our types of line now. So we're moving into two-point perspective. Let me get the title on there. And then the things to remember about two-point perspective is that we no longer can just use standard horizontal lines. Those go away. So at the top of your paper, write down these three types of line that you're allowed to use in two-point perspective. There'll be a few exceptions, like there were in one-point perspective, where we were able to use some diagonals or X's to help subdivide planes that are foreshortened. But in general, you're going to be restricted to vertical lines, so the lines that go straight up and down are still available to you. But then instead of using the horizontal lines, we're going to be directing some of our lines to a vanishing point that's off the left side of our page, and we're going to be directing other lines to a vanishing point that's off the right side of our page. So if it helps you think this through a little bit more clearly, you might imagine that all of the lines, all of the planes on the object that are running north and south should head to one vanishing point, and all the parts of the boxes or the buildings that run east and west should head to the other vanishing point. So if that kind of helps you think about the directions on a compass, it sometimes makes more sense to people. So this is the view now that we'll get with two-point perspective. And in real life, you would never be able to see both vanishing points in one view. So what happens is, if you try to force those points close enough together that you can see them both on your pages, as you get closer to those edges and as you get farther below or above the horizon line, you start to see some really severe distortion that makes the objects look unbelievable. And so we're going to talk about this cone of vision. You should have read through the PowerPoint presentation slides that talk about how we have a pretty limited range that we can see with the human eye. So somewhere between a 45-degree angle and a 60-degree angle. Usually most people that are talking about perspective mention a 60-degree cone of vision, which means that once we are looking at things that are outside of that 60 degrees from our eye, things get distorted or blurry, or we just can't see them at all without turning our head. So to try to force that kind of information into our point of view ends up creating a really distorted image like this drawing shows. So all of those areas where there's a little red arrow pointing to boxes, you can see that those boxes have become severely distorted because they are too close to the two vanishing points. And even if you're drawing one large box, like let's say you're trying to draw a big building in your picture, if you have your vanishing points too close together, it ends up really stretching out the point of the box and it looks unconvincing. So how do we fix this? This is from a PowerPoint that a professor from BYU, Brother Tanner, put together. You can watch that if you want to as well. But he suggests moving the vanishing points farther apart, and this always works. So we have to get those vanishing points outside of our cone of vision so that they're no longer distorting things that are happening toward those vanishing points. And one of the best ways we can get those vanishing points far enough apart is to actually extend our paper. So you're going to be attaching, you're going to be taping a whole extra sheet of paper to the left, a whole extra sheet of paper to the right, so that you're making sort of this portfolio that can just fold up. And you can reuse this. So what I would do is maybe make one master sheet that has the vanishing or the horizon line drawn in across all 3 sheets. And then each time you're ready to do a 2-point or even a 3-point drawing, you could just tape one of your pieces of paper out of your sketchbook right on top of this template. Make sure it's taped down so that it's not shifting around relative to where the vanishing points are. And then you can just reuse it. So what this does is all of your drawing takes place in the middle piece of paper. It's really important not to extend your drawing out onto those barn door flaps at the side, or you're going to have the same problem again. You're getting your drawing too close to those vanishing points. So force yourself to keep all your drawing on that middle piece of paper, and you should be in pretty good shape. So we'll turn the slides off, and I want to show you an example of, here's a little tiny mock-up. This is, only 9 by 12 paper. I want you to draw on your larger pad of paper, but this kind of shows you how the barn door system works here. So I've drawn my horizon line across the middle, and this paper, for example, whatever the measurement is here, and I think in this case it's probably 12 inches. Yeah, probably about 12 inches, or maybe it's 8.5 by 11. I guess it's just typing paper that I've got here. So let's say this is 11 inches. You've got to shift your vanishing points at least a third of whatever distance this is. So if you've got a great big piece of paper like 18 by 24, maybe you should be moving your vanishing points 6 inches outside of the paper, or maybe again, if this is 24 inches, maybe it's as much as 12 inches out. So somewhere between half of this distance of your drawing to a third, and do that for each side. So in this case, I think, again, if this is probably 11 inches, this might be 4 to 5 inches outside. And one thing you have to think about is how long is your straight edge. So if you have a little short straight edge, you may have to work on smaller paper, because we've got to be able to line up the straight edge with these vanishing points and reach across here. So this 12-inch ruler is even a little bit too small for this small piece of paper. It would be better to have an 18 or 24-inch ruler so that you can really reach across that. And for most cases, it's not that critical that you have measurements on your straight edge. You could even use a piece of mat board that's cut nice and straight for most of these exercises. If your ruler is just too short, you can find another straight edge that you can use to do a lot of this drawing. But this is pretty small. Again, if you don't have anything bigger than an 18-inch ruler, then you might have to work on your smaller sketchbook paper and just do a lot more detail at a small scale. But I would prefer you work on your bigger paper. So when I'm doing the demo, I'm going to be using my 14 by 17-inch paper, and it was just too big to show in the camera, the whole thing, but each one of these side papers is the same size as this main sheet, and this is from a 14 by 17-inch large oversized sketchbook. So hopefully this is the size paper that you have. If you have 18 by 24-inch paper, that's even better to do these exercises on, and you'll just need to remember to still move your vanishing points at least, a third of whatever distance this is. So probably 6 to 8 inches if it's 18 by 24 too. You want it to be pretty far apart. So for the first few shapes, I'll stay zoomed out like this so that you can see my vanishing points and see how I'm lining things up. But later on, I'm going to need to zoom in so that you're seeing more of the details of the work, and in that case you'll just have to know that I'm always using these 2 points. So things that are below the eye level are going to be slanting down this way, and then we'll do the same thing on the right vanishing point. So if you can really, I do think it helps to think of parts of the object that are running north and south all going to one vanishing point. Things that are running east and west all go to the other one. And it doesn't really matter which one you choose to be north and south and which one should be east and west, but you just want to kind of keep straight in your mind which vanishing point you should be following in order to avoid problems in your perspective drawing. So to get started, we're going to be taping down a piece of our drawing paper on top of our template here so that we can reuse it. And this way I can also see my guidelines underneath my paper to help me keep my shapes straight. And then it is really important that you tape it down so that it's not shifting around as you're doing your measurements. Now I drew my vanishing points pretty big so that you could see them in the video, but I want yours to be as small as you can make them and still find them, because the larger they are, the more room there is for error. Like you might have it lined up with one side of the dot for one of your lines, and then if it shifts, you know, an eighth of an inch for the other one, you're going to have some problems with getting the lines to work correctly. So try to make it small. And I was wondering, I mean, you might even be able to put like a tack in there so that I really should have a piece of that's probably too flimsy, but that would be another idea, so that you have a really firm nail or something in there that you can just quickly align that with and then slide your ruler up and down. It'll save a little bit of time if you have the option of actually sticking a tack into your tabletop. You might talk to whoever owns the table before you try that, but if you have a scrap piece of you know, some piece of scrap plywood or something you can put down, that actually can save you quite a bit of time and keep your registration really accurate, to have a little tiny nail or tack securely put into your vanishing points. We're going to start out by doing some of the same exercises we did in 1 point so that it feels familiar, and then we'll move into some new projects once we get the hang of those basic processes. So we're gonna go ahead and do the same little shed type form. We're gonna make the roof a little bit more complicated just for some variety, but remember now, instead of looking straight on at one flat side of the barn or the shed, we're now looking at it from the corner. So instead of starting by drawing a rectangle, we have to start by drawing the corner of the object that's closest to us. So let's again try to keep things fairly small so that we don't get too much distortion. And I'm going to start by maybe choose a point slightly off center. We're no longer using a central vanishing point at all. Everything's going to lead to these two. And if you start with the front corner of the object, that works pretty well. So I guess I'll stay just a tiny bit to the right of center. And why don't you go ahead and draw a line that is, I'm going to make my barn slightly above eye level. In fact, I'll make it a pretty big barn. So I'll put 2/3. Yeah, I'm going to put more of the line above the eye level than is below it. And that makes it feel like it's a bigger form. So again, if this is 14 inches, this line, just so you have an idea of how big I'm making this, about 3 inches. So we're going to start with just a simple box form, and I'm going to be lining up my left vanishing point and then drawing from the bottom edge of the box that direction, and the same thing at the top of that line. So both 2 lines going toward the left vanishing point, 2 lines going toward the right vanishing point from that same first line that I drew. And then you decide how big you want each side of the barn to be. I'm going to make this not too huge, maybe 2 inches. And do your best to try to keep that line truly vertical. And then I'm going to make this side of the barn about 3 inches from the center line to the line that I'm drawing right now. And we're going to add a roof on this. But before we do that, we need to locate the back face of the barn as well. So we're going to still build this as if it's a transparent object built out of plexiglass. So we're doing a similar process to what we did when we were trying to draw the hidden parts of the boxes in 1 point perspective. We're going to be going from the outer corners, all 4 of them, and we're going to be crisscrossing. So from the lower right corner of the box, we're going to actually extend to the left vanishing point. And from the top right corner, we extend to the left vanishing point. And then we'll do the opposite for the other side. So from the left top, we go to the right vanishing point. From the left bottom, we also go to the right vanishing point. And we draw these as dotted lines because they'll be the hidden part of the building. But it's good to know where that back wall is so that when we're... Alright, so This one slopes down. And at some point, we'll have the two lines intersect. So that's the point that will help us locate where the hidden back corner of the barn actually is. So now I'm going from the top left corner across to the right vanishing point, and from the bottom left corner across to the right vanishing point. And where the two dotted lines intersect is where that back corner should be. So I'll put a little dot there to help us find it in both spots. And this last vertical line that I'm drawing just connects those two intersecting points. And then I need to get rid of the extra line that's hanging out beyond that corner, so I'm erasing. There are a couple of dotted lines that we don't need anymore. So hopefully you can see that box in perspective. And now we're going to go ahead and put a peak on here. So do you remember how we added a peak on a 1-point perspective box? We used an X, and again, it's important that you're identifying the two planes that are opposite one another on the barn. So if you want the peak to go this way, you might pick, let's say, these two sides. If you want the peak to go the other way, you'd pick the opposite sides if you're looking at it from top view. So I'm going to use this. So I'm going to trace out the plane on the narrow end of the barn. And then the back end that's hidden is this one. So make sure you're following the right corners. And we're going to be doing the X system. I'll draw a solid X on the visible face of the barn so that maybe it's easier to distinguish which is which to the viewer. And I'll draw a dotted X on the hidden end. And again, if you're not sure which one in real life would be the visible end and which would be the hidden end, it's the bigger one will be the visible end. So once you've got an X at both ends, put a dot where the X intersects. That's the center of that plane of the barn. And then we're going to take a line straight up. The more accurate you are with your verticals, the better this is going to turn out. And we're going to do a little bit more complex style of roof here. We're going to do a gambrel roof, which means kind of like the barns that have two different angles on the roof. So it goes like this. There's kind of a flat slope and then a very steep slope. So in order to do that, we can't get by with just the midpoint. We need to have the midpoint, and then we need to have it divided into fourths so that there'll be an angle change at that fourth way mark. So we're going to subdivide again. So we know what the halfway point is, but then we need to find half of the half to find quarters. So what we can do is we can take 1/2 of that X, think of it as sort of, I'll just draw in the line so you can see what I'm talking about. So we'll just take 1/2 of this plane of the barn and subdivide it again into quarters, and wherever the center of that X is will be our secondary point where the angle happens. So we'll have to do that on both sides. So you'll have an X within each one of those halves of the end of the barn. So here's our next X, and then we'll do an X on the other half of that end as well. So you can just keep subdividing with X's and make smaller and smaller portions, but the limitation of that system is that it has to be even numbers. So you could have 2 sections, and then you could double it to 4 sections, and then you could have 8 sections, but you wouldn't be able to use this method very easily to get 3 segments or 7 segments. So it has some limitations. It has to be even numbers of divisions. So we'll take points up from those dots as well. And they won't go quite as far up, but we're not exactly sure where they need to stop yet. So you can go ahead and make them as long as the others if you want to, and we'll just trim them up a little bit later. Okay. And so what I want to do is figure out where we want. I think I'm just going to take, let's just choose a point to start with for the peak of the roof, and we'll start to bring it back in perspective. So we're going to take the dot here on the right side, but we're going to lead it to our left vanishing point to help find the middle of the back end of the roof. So right here, this is our midpoint, so we can mark that as the very highest point of the back of the roof. And then we need to figure out what to do with these, because we want these to also follow the rules of perspective. And so you can choose a point. I think I'm just going to choose one or the other. Let's see, it's got to be higher than, so the natural slope of the roof would be here. So in order to make it look gambrel, we've got to make it a little bit higher than that point. So maybe I'll bring it out here. And in order to find the second side, we're going to have to use perspective. So I'm going to switch now to the right vanishing point, and we're going to extend a guideline. This is just helps us know what would be a true horizontal in this case. So this is one point of the gambreled roof. This will be the other, and then it's just a matter of connect the dots. So we've got the 5 key points that we need to have, and then we'll use perspective to figure that out at the other end as well. So here's the actual contours. There'll be a slight bend here, and we could make the roof overhang that a little bit if we want to. It's not a real extreme angle change here, but you could play around and kind of adjust the angles a little bit if you wanted it to be a more noticeable angles change there. And now that we know where this point is, we can extend it back to our left vanishing point to help find the plane change heading in this direction too. And we don't know where it has to end yet, so we're going to kind of let that be. Let's go ahead and subdivide this one into fourths as well. Part of it would be hidden, but let's go ahead and figure out where that's going to be anyway. So for each one of those vertical halves of that, so I'm going to be kind of drawing an X in this half of the rectangle, and then I'll draw the X in the other half, in case you're wondering what I'm doing here. So this will be draw a dot there, and then on the other half. And remember that, you know, this second box is actually, we're following the dotted lines. We're not following the solid line here. So I'm going from this corner to this corner. And here's the center of that one. So we'll extend up the dotted lines just like we did here to find the other fourths. Okay, so where this line of the roof meets this center line is the opposite end of what's happening here. So we're finding that same angle there. We already know where the edge of the roof meets the wall, the vertical wall, so that's easy to finish off too. And if you remember how we constructed our stairs, if we were to extend an imaginary line straight up from this right vanishing point, we could find, you know, this line on this more shallow part of the roof, and this line, if we, you know, this is not, I should lay it flat so it stays straight. But if we extended these, they should, you know, if your angles are correct, if your verticals are really correct, you should get them converging at a point exactly somewhere above the right vanishing point. And then this other slope is also going to do that, but it's just going to meet much, much further up above the right vanishing point. So that's a way you could check to see if your slopes are correct, is follow them up, see if they meet at a point right above your vanishing point. And even though this one's a much shallower angle, it also is going to meet directly above that right vanishing point somewhere. So that's pretty cool. And then for this hidden part, we can just kind of finish it. We can imagine, you know, from this corner, if we were to take that point back to our left vanishing point with the dotted line, wherever it hits that vertical line that we had drawn at the other end should tell us exactly where that peak would happen. Okay, so it should be right here. And again, that's the hidden part, but it corresponds to what's happening at this end, but it's just on the hidden end. So I'm going to go ahead and draw this as if we could see through it as dotted lines so that you can start to see what the back end of the barn would, how it would be constructed. So that's the first slope, and then this is just finishing off that more steep slope. Alright, so we've got a barn. At this point I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so we don't have quite so much dead space on our view here. Let me see if I can get my... And you'll just need to know that I'm using those right and left vanishing points for any of the lines that are not verticals, but that way we can see the drawing a little bit bigger. Okay. So I'm going to focus mostly on things below the horizon line, so I won't worry about showing so much of the paper at the top of the image there. Okay, I've zoomed in on the barn a little bit. Our vanishing points are still way outside of our paper, but this way you can see our next step a little bit better. So remember when we did the fences in 1-point perspective, how we started with one fence post that's close to us and then projected it back toward our vanishing points? We're going to do the same thing, and I want to show you how to make the fence bend as well. So we're going to pretend that this fence encloses our barn, and we're going to plot it out in one direction using our left vanishing point, and then we're going to have it change direction at the corner and head back toward our right vanishing point. So we're switching, whenever we switch vanishing points, we're changing the orientation of the fence from running north and south to running east and west. So to start with, let's give ourselves a guideline. I'm going to try to keep our fence pretty low, maybe outside of the area where the barn is being drawn. And I do want to make sure it's coming behind the, maybe I'll do that part first. So let's make the fence, in fact, let's have it start right at the corner of the barn, like it's attached to the barn. So at the very bottom left corner of your barn, let's go ahead and extend a line outward using our right vanishing point. That's going to be the bottom of the fence. And then for the top of the fence, let's keep it below our horizon line so the horizon line's not getting in our way. And we're going to extend this one out. So again, it's really important that both of these lines, even though you can't see my right vanishing point, they're both heading toward my right vanishing point. The fact that we're so close to the horizon line makes these feel like they're almost horizontal, but they are not horizontal lines. They're actually vanishing lines still. So let's find a point where we want our fence to end. And I'm going to use this. So now what we're going to do in order to make it feel like it's changing direction, we're going to have this be the corner post. And so the part that's heading toward the barn is, let's say, running whatever, north and south, whatever we just determined. And then now that we've changed to our left vanishing point, we're going to make it feel like it's running at a 90-degree angle from that first angle. So we're still starting at this corner post, but now we're heading the other direction. So we're using the left vanishing point at the top and the bottom of that fence, and we're extending it out this way now. And it looks like it's going to interfere a little bit with the barn, so we just have to keep track that the fence itself is actually the upper, this line that's kind of running through it right now. And so we can use our dividing system here. Let's just figure out where we want our, in fact, we can have the fence, and let's figure out let's shorten it a little bit so it ends, you know, just even with the barn. So if we want, we can have it bend again. So I'm going to use my right vanishing point, and I'm lining it up with the base of the barn so that the fence will actually be here too. And we won't know how tall it needs to be where it attaches to the barn until we trace it back from this part of the fence. So let's go ahead and I think I'm going to turn this line into a dotted line because it'll be covered up by the closer fence initially, I think. Okay. So from this point right here, so if you remember how I constructed this, I used the right vanishing point for this line heading to that vanishing point. I used the left vanishing point heading uphill this way. And where those two meet is where that corner post needs to be. So go ahead and draw in. We're just going to kind of wing the width of it, just sort of make, can be any size you want. And that way we can get rid of this part of the line. It won't end up confusing things by being so low. We're going to bring it back up to attach the barn here. So we can find this point in two different ways. We can follow the top of the post and carry it back across to the right vanishing point. That's the same one we used when we were doing the bottom of that side of the fence. So that works fine. The other way we could have found this point is if we've drawn this correctly, this point and this point should lead toward the left vanishing point. So you can double check to see if that's true. And you know, in real life we probably wouldn't have a fence right on the barn, so we'll just let the barn enclose that side of the pasture. But you could double check that it is really drawn in perspective by connecting those two, and they should lead to your left vanishing point. So we're going to do a little bit simpler method here to divide this fence just to keep things moving. And what I'd like you to do is we're just going to divide each one of these portions a few different times. So we're going to do an X to place a center post, and then we're going to put an X in each one of those halves and put another post. And we'll do that on all four sides of there just to show you another method for spacing things evenly. So we're using X's lightly. This might get a little cluttered because we've got so much going on here with the barn behind there, but follow your lines pretty carefully so you can find the center X there. And if you do it right, it should be a little bit, the side that gets smaller should also be a shorter distance. As far as the size of the posts go, you can just sort of estimate. So as the fence gets smaller and smaller, the width of the posts should also get smaller and smaller. So do your best to kind of estimate if you were to shrink something down on a copy machine. Try to keep the height to width ratios pretty consistent. But I'm not going to worry too much about being too exact on this right now. And then let's keep subdividing so the fence is a little bit closer, the poles are a little closer together. You're going to end up with lots of X's here, so it is important to try to keep the drawing fairly clean so you can find those midpoints. You may have to erase old construction lines that you don't need anymore in order to see the new ones. Okay, so here and here are where we'll be putting in the next couple posts. And I'm just estimating width. I want it to be slightly fatter than this one, but maybe not as fat as that one, so I think I made that one a little too big. And since it's slightly below our eye level, we could maybe see a sliver of the top of the post. We wouldn't see anything at the bottom, but you could still make it curved. That should be a little bit fatter. And then where this one is, there would be another post here. And then we'll do the same thing on the other two faces. So we have this section of the fence, and then we have this section that's back here. Now this one back here should have the same number of sections that this one has. So let's make sure that, you know, we're using the X. Do a single X to find the midpoint, and then for each of the two halves, you're going to do another X. So I'll pause while I'm doing that to save a little bit of time, but I'll show you the finished product. Okay, so I'll talk you back through what we did. I darkened in the two corner posts so it's real easy to see from a distance. We've got these two corner posts, and then for each of the 3 planes of the fence, I use the X to find the middle post on each side, and then I subdivided again with another X. So we ended up with, we should have 4 posts on each face of the fencing. And then what we'll do is decide what kind of fence you want. So it could be an electric fence, it could be a split rail fence. I think I'm just going to make mine more of a solid, like it's made out of planks of wood. So I'm going to go ahead and draw in those tops again and give it a double line so it looks like it's got some thickness. And then what we can do is we can start with one of the rails. So maybe we'll start again with this front corner since it's the largest post that we've got. And you could just divide, you could decide how big you want each post to be. So maybe, or each rail of the fence. So if you just want to measure off, you're allowed to measure off of a vertical. Maybe just choose a point that you want those posts to attach to. And from those points, we can now extend in both directions. So let's say the bottom post is going to be this section, the middle one somewhere here, and the top one here. You can just take those distances and then extend them both back in both directions. So the bottom rung of the fence, let's say, is going to be here, and then pivot it up. We're using the right vanishing point to draw these 2 sides of the fence. And then we'll use that same division on this front pole to make sure that the rails feel like they're the same thickness going the other way too. So again, I'll sketch them in a little bit so that we can see them among all these lines. We can tell which parts are supposed to be the boards. And if you wanted to feel like there's a little bit of thickness on each of those rails, you could just draw a very fine double line there at the top to make it feel like there's some width to those boards. And I would just do my best to try to keep them all feeling like they're about the same thickness. As we get closer to eye level, you really wouldn't see as much of that, so you could make it a tiny bit thinner as we get to the top. And then I'm just going to use these same 3 divisions, and now I'm aligning them with my left vanishing point and heading the other direction. So just from this point back, slide it up. I'm keeping my finger pinned on the left vanishing point so that it isn't shifting around at that point, but it's just able to pivot. And then I'll also add a little second line here to kind of add some thickness to that rail, and again maybe a little bit of hatching just to kind of help it be easier to read by the viewer. Now that we've extended the rails back to this corner of the fence, we can use these marks here now, and we bend the corner again by switching back to the right vanishing point to figure out how big the slats would be on that farthest part of the fence. Because it's the farthest away from us, it should be the smallest. So if you don't have it small enough, try to figure out where you made that mistake and correct it. I'll shade it while I've got the straight edge there so that it's quicker. And then I'll draw a double line here for the bottom, and it's only going to matter where we can see through the other fence. So here this one's blocking it, so we may not even need that part of it, but I will draw the other back edge at the top there. So again, that's going to be almost silhouetted. It's just a tiny area. And the bottommost slat comes along here. So here again. And shift up 1/16 of an inch, other edge, and we can shade that in as well. Here's where line weight variation can really help you out, because we're getting so many lines there all together, if you wanted to use your kneaded eraser to lighten those distant lines a little bit, you can pinch this into a pretty narrow shape and get in between some of those other, so we can just kind of gently lighten those most distant lines without smearing them. If you just press and lift, then you're not going to smudge it around as much as you would if you are rubbing it back and forth. I think that line is also the other option is to darken the one in the foreground, so you could come back in and kind of retrace those outlines a little bit darker just so it really pops out nice and dark. You could switch to a slightly softer pencil, but you do need one that holds a good point, or else you're not going to be able to be as precise as you need to be. So, see if I can darken a few on this side a little bit too. Just pressing a little bit harder. Get some of those lines redrawn. Pop them out a little bit more distinctly. Okay. So we've got a fence, and we could even swing one of those, if you wanted a gate in the fence somewhere, instead of bending the corner, just like we did for those doors in 1-point perspective, if we took this section of the gate, for example, and we use the left vanishing point to swing it outwards, that would make it appear to be open. So that's a really easy thing to do, now that you know the basics of which vanishing point to use.